How people fell in love in the 1600s. Good evening, my sleepless friend. Dim your lights. Draw your blankets close. Imagine the faint smell of rotting lace and unwashed bodies as we embark on tonight's tale of historical misery. Tonight, we delve into the putrid perfumed world of 17th century romance. You've swiped left on countless faces. You've ghosted and been ghosted. You've endured awkward dinner conversations and sent regrettable late-night messages. But rest assured, dear viewer, your romantic woes pale in comparison to the elaborate dance of death and desperation that was courtship in the 1600s. Close your eyes. The year is 1603. England mourns as Queen Elizabeth has just died, James I ascends to the throne, and you are about to wake up in early Stuart England with one simple, impossible goal: to fall in love, or at least to find someone with whom you might survive the crushing weight of matrimony. You are young, you are single, and you are completely doomed. Part 1. Morning. Preparing the vessel of disappointment. You wake with a start, your eyes flying open to the dim light of dawn filtering through the greasy paper of your window. If you're fortunate enough to be of the gentry, perhaps you have actual glass, a luxury that announces to the world that your family possesses at least 3 pieces of silver and possibly an opinion. If you're of more modest means, you share your sleeping quarters with 3 siblings, a grandmother of indeterminate age, and possibly a chicken. Either way, today is important. Today, you have decided, is the day you will begin your quest for love, or more accurately, a partner with whom to endure life's brutalities until one of you, probably you, succumbs to an infection that modern medicine would treat with a 2-day course of antibiotics. You stretch beneath your woolen blanket, which hasn't been washed since the Spanish Armada thought attacking England was a good idea. The mattress beneath you, stuffed with straw and possibly home to a family of mice, crackles with your movement. If you're wealthy, you may sleep on a feather mattress, a luxurious cloud of goose down and bed bugs that feed equally on rich and poor blood. Your body odor envelops you like a familiar friend. You smell of fear and cheese, mostly cheese, and possibly onions. Hygiene. Preparing your aromatic canvas, time to prepare yourself for potential courtship. Contrary to popular belief, people in the 1600s did attempt cleanliness. They simply defined it differently than we might today. You approach your washing basin, a ceramic bowl containing water your servant fetched last night, if you're wealthy, or that you hauled yourself from the communal well, if you're not. The water is cold, with a thin film of ice if it's winter. Soap exists but is a luxury. Instead, you might use a mixture of white wine vinegar and rose water, scrubbing your face and hands vigorously while avoiding getting fully wet, which everyone knows causes illness and possibly death. Bathing, you see, is considered dangerous by many medical authorities. The warm water opens your pores, allowing miasma, bad air, to enter your body and disrupt your humors. Some physicians recommend bathing no more than 4 times a year. The truly health-conscious bathe only once annually, usually in May when the weather is neither too hot nor too cold. Queen Elizabeth herself reportedly bathed monthly, a scandalous frequency that many attributed to her foreign influences. You scrub your face with a linen cloth, inspecting your teeth in a small cloudy mirror, if you're wealthy enough to own one. Your teeth are present, some of them anyway. The rest have surrendered to the relentless assault of sugar, if you're rich enough to afford it, or to the equally destructive powers of coarse bread filled with bits of millstone if you're poor. You clean your teeth with a linen cloth dipped in salt, or, if you're sophisticated, a mixture of honey, salt, and burned rosemary. The truly fashionable use a twig chewed at one end to form a primitive brush. Your breath still smells like a small animal died in your throat, but it's marginally better than it was. Your hair. Oh, your glorious hair. If you're wealthy, it hasn't been properly washed in weeks. Instead, it's been combed and powdered, with perfumed pomade applied liberally to mask the smell. If you're a laborer, your hair is likely covered by a cap or coif most days, creating a perfect environment for lice to build their own little romantic relationships. Speaking of unwanted companionship, your body is likely home to various forms of wildlife. Lice in your hair, fleas in your clothes, possibly even tiny mites burrowing into your skin if you're truly blessed. These parasites don't discriminate based on social class. The king himself is host to an impressive menagerie of tiny freeloaders. The difference is that wealthy parasites live in silk and velvet, while poor parasites make do with rough wool and linen. Clothing, armor for the heart. Now for the most important part of your romantic preparation, your clothing. In the 1600s, clothing isn't just fabric. It's language, currency, and armor. What you wear tells potential suitors everything from your social status to your moral character, your fertility to your financial prospects. If you're a woman of means, you begin with your shift. A simple linen undergarment that, being the only item regularly washed, is the cleanest thing touching your body. Next comes your stays. Not yet the rib-crushing corset of later centuries, but a stiffened bodice designed to give you the conical torso that inexplicably drives men wild with desire. The ideal female silhouette resembles nothing found in nature. A flat-fronted cone from waist to bust, with breasts pushed up and together to create a shelf upon which one could comfortably rest a small breakfast tray. Your waist is compressed, your posture forcibly straightened. Breathing is optional. Digestion is for the weak. Over this architectural foundation goes your petticoat, then your kirtle or gown. Sleeves attach separately, often with decorative ribbons called points. If you're fashionable, your sleeves are slashed to reveal the fabric beneath, a style that began when soldiers patched their torn garments after battle, and somehow became the height of fashion. Your skirts are supported by a farthingale, a hoop skirt or padded roll that extends your lower half outward in defiance of doorways and intimate conversation. The resulting silhouette makes you appear approximately as wide as you are tall, like a well-dressed garden gnome. If you're a man, your journey begins with your linen shirt, the only part of your ensemble that's regularly washed. Over this goes your doublet, a padded jacket that gives your torso the ideal masculine shape, which in the early 1600s means a somewhat pigeon-like chest and possibly a peascod belly, a rounded, padded lower front that suggests prosperity rather than beer consumption. Your lower half is encased in breeches, either the voluminous trunk hose that make your legs look like stuffed sausages, or the slightly more modest Venetian style that end at the knee. Below, stockings held up by garters complete the look. And then there's the codpiece, that peculiar genital display case that had reached its architectural zenith in the previous century, but still makes occasional appearances in conservative circles. Nothing says, "I am a virile specimen worthy of your womb," like a padded protrusion suggestively positioned at your groin. It's like sending an unsolicited sext, except it's attached to your actual body, and everyone has to look at it during church. Regardless of gender, your outfit is completed with a ruff, a pleated collar that encircles your neck like a decorative platter displaying your head for consumption. The size of your ruff correlates directly with your social standing and inversely with your ability to turn your head. Both men and women finish their ensembles with accessories: gloves, hats, canes, fans, and most importantly, perfume. Lots of perfume, applied liberally to mask the accumulating symphony of bodily odors. Popular scents include musk, civet, derived from gland secretions of civet cats, ambergris, essentially whale vomit, and various floral concoctions. You smell like a flower shop located downwind from a tannery, but by 17th century standards, you're irresistible. Part 2. Mid-morning, entering the marketplace of misery. As you step out into the morning air, it's time to acknowledge the rigid framework that will determine your romantic fate more decisively than any physical attribute or personal charm: your social class. In the 1600s, love doesn't just cross boundaries. It rarely even acknowledges their existence. The social hierarchy is less a ladder to climb, and more a series of parallel corridors, with occasional peepholes between them, but very few doors. If you're aristocracy, your potential marriage pool consists of other aristocrats or perhaps wealthy gentry. If you're a craftsman, you'll likely wed the daughter or son of another craftsman. If you're a farmer, your romantic horizon extends to the next farm or perhaps the next village, but certainly not to the manor house on the hill. It's rather like modern dating apps. If Tinder sorted people not by geographic proximity, but by how many goats their grandfather owned. Marrying beneath oneself isn't just discouraged. It can be socially and economically catastrophic. A noblewoman who marries a merchant might find herself cut off from family, stripped of inheritance, and whispered about in the halls where she was once welcomed. A craftsman who marries a nobleman's daughter might gain a well-connected wife, but lose his guild membership when other members decide he's become too proud for their company. Class endogamy, marrying within one's social class, isn't just a cultural preference. It's an economic necessity. Marriage is the primary means of transferring wealth, maintaining family status, and forming alliances in an age before corporate mergers and LinkedIn connections. Romance across class lines does happen, of course. Humans, being the stubborn, hormone-addled creatures they are. But such relationships typically end in one of three ways: tragic separation, scandalous elopement, likely followed by poverty, or the classic secret affair that everyone actually knows about but pretends not to notice. None are particularly conducive to long-term happiness, but they do make for excellent ballads, which will be some comfort as you weep into your ale. The marriage market, human livestock exchange. You've made it to the town square, heart pounding with anticipation. In the 1600s, finding a partner isn't a private endeavor. It's public theater, complete with audience commentary. If you're a young woman, your value in the marriage market is determined by a combination of beauty, breeding, family connection, and dowry. Yes, dowry. That sum of money, property, or goods that your family provides to sweeten the deal for a potential husband. Because why would a man possibly want to marry you unless your father throws in a flock of sheep and the good? Silver, think of it as a reverse engagement ring, except instead of a small diamond, it's enough resources to support a household for years. And instead of symbolizing eternal love, it symbolizes your father's desperation to get you out of the house before you become, dramatic whisper, an old maid at 23. If you're a young man, your marketability depends on your prospects, your inheritance, profession, land holdings, and reputation. Are you a stable investment? Will you die in the next plague outbreak and leave your wife destitute? These are the questions keeping the parents of eligible daughters awake at night. For the nobility and wealthy merchants, marriages are negotiated like peace treaties between warring nations, often with similar levels of diplomacy and potential for armed conflict. Legal contracts specify exactly what each party brings to the union, who gets what if one party dies, and detailed provisions for those human commodities that might result from the arrangement, otherwise known as children. For the common folk, the process is less formal, but no less strategic. Local festivals, markets, and church gatherings serve as evaluation grounds where potential matches can be observed. Gossip can be exchanged, and reputations can be assessed. Speaking of church, this is where much of your courtship will take place, particularly in Protestant England. Nothing says, "I desire your hand in marriage," quite like making eye contact across a sermon on eternal damnation. If you catch someone glancing at you during the description of hellfire, congratulations. You might have an admirer. or they might be imagining you among the tormented souls. It's difficult to tell from across the nave. Church is also where bans of marriage are announced. Public declarations of a couple's intention to marry, proclaimed on 3 consecutive Sundays. This gives everyone in the community ample opportunity to object if they know of any impediments to the marriage, such as one party already being married, being too closely related to their intended, or having promised themselves to someone else. It's essentially a formalized gossip session with divine oversight. And you thought having your relationship status on Facebook was public. Matchmakers, professional dealers of human futures. If the natural marketplace fails to yield results, there's always the professional route. Matchmakers exist in all social classes, though they go by different names and operate with varying degrees of formality. Among the upper classes, they might be family friends, well-connected widows, or professional marriage brokers who maintain lists of eligible parties and their assets, matching complementary prospects for a fee. Think of them as human databases operating in an age when data processing meant writing very quickly with a quill. For the middling sort, matchmakers might be respected community members, the miller's wife who knows everyone's business, the innkeeper who hears all the gossip, the parish priest concerned with the moral welfare and tax contributions of his flock. Among the poor, matchmaking is often more direct. A farmer might simply inform his son that the neighboring farmer has a daughter of marriageable age and conveniently owns the adjacent field that would complete their property. The truly desperate might even consult a cunning woman, a local, wise woman who dabbles in herbal remedies, minor spells, and matchmaking. For a fee, she might provide a charm to attract a specific person's attention or reveal the identity of your future spouse through various divination methods. The church frowns upon such practices, of course, but what the vicar doesn't know won't lead to accusations of witchcraft. Probably. Regardless of the method, matchmakers serve a crucial function in 17th century society. They translate the complex language of family interests, personal assets, and social standing into potential matches while maintaining the fiction that romance might somehow be involved in the process. Part 3. Midday, the deadly art of courtship. The sun is high now, and with it, your hopes for romantic connection. But how to communicate your interest without compromising your reputation or triggering a duel? Welcome to the Byzantine world of 17th century flirtation, where everything is a code and one wrong move could ruin you socially, or end with someone getting stabbed. In the 1600s, direct expression of romantic interest is considered vulgar, desperate, or both. Instead, interest must be conveyed through an elaborate system of nonverbal cues, proxies, and plausibly deniable interactions. If you're a woman, your primary flirtation tool is the fan, not just an accessory for keeping cool, but a semaphore system of romantic communication. A fan drawn across the cheek says, "I desire to speak with you." A fan rested on the right cheek means yes, while the left cheek indicates no. Opening a fan wide might signal, "Wait for me," while a half-opened fan pressed to the lips suggests, "You may kiss me." Carrying an open fan in the left hand announces to the world that you're seeking a relationship. It's essentially texting, except that misinterpreting an emoji won't result in a scandalized dowager having an apoplectic fit in the corner. Gloves offer another medium for silent communication. Dropping one's glove, accidentally of course, gives a suitor the opportunity to return it, establishing contact without impropriety. Biting the tips of one's gloves while looking at someone suggests desire. Turning down the tops of one's gloves indicates interest in conversation. For men, the language of hats provides similar opportunities. The position of your hat, the way you doff it, even which hand you use to adjust it, can signal everything from passing interest to serious intent. Eye contact is perhaps the most dangerous form of flirtation, as it leaves no physical evidence but can communicate volumes. A lingering glance across a crowded market might indicate interest. while being caught staring for too long could be interpreted as an insult to a woman's honor, potentially resulting in her male relatives having pointed discussions with you, possibly with actual points. The truly bold might attempt accidental physical contact, a brushed hand while passing an object, standing slightly closer than propriety dictates while examining market goods, or the electric thrill of momentarily touching fingers during a country dance. And then there's the handkerchief, that innocent square of fabric that becomes a romantic missile when dropped strategically in the path of a desired person. A monogrammed handkerchief recovered and returned creates a connection, a conversation, a reason for future interaction. It's the 17th century equivalent of giving someone your phone number, except it can be plausibly dismissed as a simple act of courtesy rather than romantic intent. All these nonverbal signals create a parallel conversation beneath the mundane exchange of pleasantries, a secret language in which interested parties can communicate desire while maintaining the fiction of propriety. Because God is watching, always, and so is everyone else, eagerly waiting for you to make a socially catastrophic mistake they can discuss for the next decade. Love letters, epistolary evidence of madness. You've established mutual interest through the subtle choreography of fans and glances. Now it's time for the next step, written communication, the 17th century equivalent of graduating from likes and comments to direct messages. Love letters in the 1600s aren't just expressions of affection. They're legal documents, potential blackmail material, and literary performances all rolled into one. They're also the only private communication possible in an age when unmarried people of opposite sexes are rarely, if ever, left alone together. Composing a love letter is an art form requiring education, skill, and an impressive tolerance for florid metaphors. The typical 17th century love letter contains an elaborate formal address establishing the recipient's place in the social hierarchy, self-deprecating remarks about the writer's unworthiness, grandiose declarations of devotion using classical references, at least 3 comparisons of the beloved to celestial bodies, several mentions of suffering, preferably involving the writer's heart being pierced, burned, or otherwise tortured by love. Assurances that the writer will die if unrequited, probably soon. A formal closing that somehow manages to be both humble and presumptuous. Most esteemed Mistress Elizabeth, pearl among women, whose radiance outshines the very stars heaven has placed to guide lost sailors home, I, your most devoted and unworthy servant, take up my inadequate pen to express what my faltering tongue cannot, when in your divine presence. As Phoebus burns in his heavenly course, so too burns my heart with the flames of pure devotion. Like Icarus, I soar toward the sun of your beauty, knowing full well my wings may melt, yet unable to chart any other course. Sleep eludes me. Food has lost its savor. My every waking thought is consumed by visions of your face, fair as the moon and terrible as an army with banners. I exist in a purgatorial state, neither fully alive nor granted the mercy of death, until I might know whether my suit finds favor in your sight. I remain, as I shall until my final breath, your most humble and devoted servant, Thomas. Of course, such letters carry significant risk. If received favorably, they establish romantic intent. If rejected, they become evidence of attempted seduction, potentially damaging reputations. If intercepted, they provide documented proof of inappropriate relationships. The physical delivery of love letters presents its own challenges. In wealthy households, trusted servants might be bribed to carry messages. In others, mutual friends or younger siblings might serve as couriers. The truly desperate might hide letters in prearranged locations, hollow trees, specific books in a library, or tucked into hymnals at church. And then there's the perilous period of waiting for a response. Days or weeks might pass as your letter makes its journey, is read, considered, and potentially answered. During this time, you exist in romantic limbo, analyzing every interaction for signs that your letter has been received, read, appreciated, or, most terrifying of all, shared with others. If you do receive a response, it's likely to be equally oblique, requiring careful interpretation. A formal response acknowledging your letter but speaking only of the weather and family health might indicate cautious interest. No response could mean anything from non-receipt to complete rejection to a family intervention. The truly fortunate might receive a token along with a reply, a pressed flower, a ribbon, or a lock of hair. These keepsakes become sacred objects, physical proof of reciprocated affection. They're also potential evidence in ecclesiastical courts if a betrothal is later disputed. So perhaps don't keep them in your underwear drawer. Courtship gifts. Symbolic payments for affection. Love letters established. It's time to demonstrate the seriousness of your intentions through material offerings. Courtship gifts in the 17th century aren't just pretty trinkets. They're symbolic, communications, tests of financial stability, and sometimes legally binding promises. If you're a man of means courting a woman, your gifts follow a traditional progression in both value and implication. You might begin with small tokens, sweets, ribbons, or gloves. Gloves are particularly significant, representing the potential joining of hands in marriage. Giving a pair rather than a single glove symbolizes that you're considering the match seriously rather than merely flirting. As courtship progresses, gifts become more valuable and personal. A book of poetry, inscribed if you're literate. A small piece of jewelry or a personalized embroidered handkerchief might indicate deepening attachment. The most significant pre-engagement gift is often a ring, not yet an engagement ring, but a posy ring with a romantic verse inscribed inside. Accepting such a ring doesn't constitute a formal betrothal, but signals serious intent on both sides. Women's gifts to men are typically handmade items demonstrating domestic skills, embroidered handkerchiefs, shirt collars, or small sewn pouches. These tokens showcase her ability to maintain a household and clothe a family. Valuable assets in an era before ready-made clothing. For couples of more modest means, courtship gifts might be practical items with romantic symbolism. A carved wooden spoon, representing the ability to feed a family. A knife, protection and provision. Or homemade preserves, domestic skill and care, carry significant meaning without extravagant cost. And then there are the more unusual traditional courtship gifts. In parts of rural England, a man might give his beloved a wooden or pewter spoon with symbols carved into the handle. Hearts, keyholes, wheels, or chains, each communicating specific promises. Faithful love, a secure home, prosperity, or eternal connection. In some regions, an apple with coins pressed into it symbolizes both fertility and financial provision. A smoothly polished nutmeg, pierced and tied with ribbon to be worn as a necklace, offers both exotic luxury, nutmeg being an expensive import, and protection against disease. For the truly committed, love tokens might include coins bent in half, or with one partner's initials hammered into them, permanent alterations to valuable currency, symbolizing the permanent nature of the attachment being formed. The common thread among all these gifts is that they combine practical value with romantic symbolism, reflecting a society in which marriage itself is viewed as both an emotional bond and a pragmatic economic partnership. Of course, accepting gifts carries its own implications and risks. A woman who accepts too many valuable gifts without a formal betrothal might be accused of leading a suitor on, or worse, of effectively selling her affections. A man who lavishes gifts on a woman but withdraws his suit might be subject to legal action for breach of promise if the relationship was interpreted as a betrothal. So choose your gifting strategy carefully. That seemingly innocent nutmeg might just bind you legally to a lifetime with someone whose breakfast habits will drive you to contemplating hemlock in your porridge. Part 4. Afternoon. The logistics of legitimate longing. The sun is high in the sky, and you've managed to arrange an outing with your prospective beloved. Congratulations. You will now enjoy the pleasure of their company, the melodious sound of their voice, and the constant, unwavering supervision of at least one additional person whose sole purpose is to ensure that you maintain a Bible's width apart at all times. Welcome to the joy of chaperoning, the 17th century version of having your parents read your text messages while sitting between you and your date at the movies. For women of quality, being alone with an unrelated man is simply not done. Period. The mere suggestion would send shockwaves through respectable society and potentially ruin your reputation beyond repair. Instead, any interaction must be supervised by a relative, servant, or respectable older woman who has long since abandoned any romantic notions of her own, and now derives her sole pleasure from preventing others from experiencing them. The ideal chaperone possesses keen eyesight, excellent hearing, an ironclad sense of propriety, and a complete lack of sentimentality. She, and it is almost always a she, is strategically positioned to observe every movement, interpret every glance, and intervene at the first hint of impropriety. Chaperones come in various forms, from the distracted elderly aunt who might doze off behind her embroidery, the best kind, to the razor-sharp spinster sister who can spot a forbidden touch from 50 paces through a crowded room, the worst. Younger siblings pressed into chaperoning duty might be bribed with sweets or threats, but are inherently unreliable and prone to blackmail. The art of romantic conversation under chaperoning requires skill, subtlety, and the ability to communicate volumes through seemingly innocent comments about the weather. How bright the sun is today might actually mean your beauty outshines all heavenly bodies. I find this breeze most refreshing could translate to, I would die for a moment alone, with you behind that conveniently large oak tree. Physical contact under chaperoning is limited to the most formal and prescribed interactions. A hand offered to assist over uneven ground, fingers briefly touching while passing an object, or the momentary pressure of palms during a country dance. Each of these trivial connections sends lightning through your body, partly due to genuine attraction, and partly because the forbidden nature of touch heightens every sensation. The truly daring might attempt to pass notes when the chaperone is distracted, exchange significant glances over the chaperone's head, or position themselves so that their skirts or coattails momentarily brush against each other while walking. Such brazen behaviors could merit a chapter in the most scandalous French novels. For the lower classes, chaperoning requirements are somewhat relaxed by necessity. When both young men and women must work from dawn to dusk, maintaining constant supervision becomes impractical. Instead, the community serves as a collective chaperone, with neighbors, fellow workers, and passers-by all potential witnesses to any impropriety. Certain sanctioned events allow for marginally more freedom. Harvest, festivals, May Day celebrations, or village dances create opportunities for interaction within community supervision. These events often include traditional games or customs that permit brief moments of sanctioned physical contact or private conversation. The bundling tradition practiced in some rural areas represents perhaps the most surprising chaperoning. Compromise. A courting couple might be allowed to lie together on a bed, fully clothed, sometimes with a wooden board between them, or the young woman sewn into a bundling sack. Often, a family member sleeps in the same room. This practice allows for intimate conversation, while, theoretically, preventing physical consummation. Yes, you heard that correctly. Parents who wouldn't allow their daughter to walk to the well without a chaperone might permit her suitor to lie beside her on a bed, separated only by a plank of wood and their rapidly disintegrating self-control. Human logic has always been fascinatingly inconsistent when it comes to matters of the heart. Betrothal, legal contracts of affection. The sun begins its westward descent, and your courtship has progressed to the next critical stage. Betrothal. In the 17th century, this isn't just a romantic milestone, it's a legally binding contract, with significant financial and social implications. Contrary to modern engagement, which is essentially a promise to make a promise, betrothal in the 1600s is a formal contract often as legally binding as marriage itself. Breaking a betrothal without significant cause can result in lawsuits, financial penalties, and lasting damage to one's reputation and marriage prospects. For the aristocracy and wealthy merchants, betrothal negotiations resemble high-stakes diplomatic relations. Family representatives, typically fathers or male guardians, meet to discuss the union in explicitly financial terms. The woman's dowry is assessed against the man's prospects and property. Settlements are arranged specifying exactly what happens to property in various scenarios. Children born, no children born. Wife predeceasing husband, husband predeceasing wife. Marriage contracts might include everything from annual clothing, allowances for the wife to specific properties set aside for younger sons yet to be conceived. Nothing says romance quite like legally binding financial provisions for hypothetical humans who don't exist yet. For the middling sorts, craftsmen, shopkeepers, and successful farmers, betrothal involves similar negotiations on a smaller scale. A craftsman's daughter might bring a dowry including household items, perhaps a small sum of money, and the promise of future inheritance. In return, her prospective husband offers his established trade, workshop, or farm. Among the laboring poor, formal contracts are less common, but verbal agreements before witnesses carry similar weight. A farmer's son might promise his betrothed a cow upon marriage. She might pledge her household skills and labor. These verbal contracts are taken seriously and can be enforced through community pressure or even church courts. Once betrothal terms are agreed upon, the couple exchanges formal promises, often in the presence of witnesses, and may exchange tokens such as rings or coins. This ceremony, called handfasting in some regions, typically includes the physical joining of hands to symbolize the union being formed. With betrothal established, the couple enters a liminal state between single and married life. More privacy might be granted to betrothed couples, though full physical intimacy remains officially forbidden until after the wedding ceremony. That said, historical records suggest that many couples considered betrothal sufficient moral justification for physical consummation, particularly among the lower classes. Parish records across Europe show a suspicious pattern of first children born 6 or 7 months after marriage, suggesting that many couples began their physical relationship during betrothal. Church authorities routinely condemned this practice, but its persistence suggests a pragmatic popular understanding of betrothal as a quasi-marital state. After all, if you've signed all the paperwork, exchanged the promises, and committed your entire economic future to another person, what's a little physical affection between future spouses? Once betrothed, the couple must publish bans, public announcements of their intention to marry, made on 3 consecutive Sundays in the parish church. This tradition serves multiple purposes. It ensures that the community is aware of the upcoming marriage, allows time for any impediments, such as pre-existing marriages or close blood relationships, to be discovered, and creates an opportunity for anyone with objections to come forward. If any person knows cause or just impediment why these 2 persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, ye are to declare it. These aren't just dramatic words from a ceremony. They represent a real legal process. Objections might include pre-contracts with other parties, consanguinity, being too closely related, or other canonical impediments. Such objections can halt a wedding, invalidate a betrothal, and potentially lead to ecclesiastical court proceedings. So if you've promised marriage to someone else, are secretly your betrothed's cousin, or are hiding any other relationship-ending secrets, The banns period is when your carefully constructed romantic house of cards will likely collapse. Sleep well. Part 5. Evening. Romance in the shadows, the marriage bed. When biology meets. Theology, the sun sinks low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the town. The workday ends, suppers are consumed, and thoughts turn to the most consequential aspect of romantic relationships. The physical union that seals the marriage covenant, produces heirs, and is governed by an bewildering array of religious, medical, and social regulations. Sexual knowledge in the 1600s exists in a strange limbo, simultaneously considered essential information for married couples and dangerous corruption for the unmarried. Young people enter marriage with varying levels of knowledge, much of it wildly inaccurate. If you're a woman, your mother or married female relatives might provide a rushed, euphemistic explanation of wifely duties shortly before your wedding. This explanation likely emphasizes your obligation to submit to your husband's desires, the importance of procreation, and possibly some vague warnings about pain and blood. If you're fortunate, you might receive practical advice about positions, least likely to cause discomfort. If you're unfortunate, you might be told simply to lie back and think of England, or France, or wherever your patriotic duties lie. If you're a man, your sexual education might be marginally more practical, often delivered by married friends, or relatives with a mix of religious admonition and crude encouragement. You may receive contradictory instructions to both satisfy your wife, to ensure her fidelity, and maintain dominance in the relationship, to ensure proper household governance. Medical understanding of reproduction in the 1600s remains heavily influenced by ancient Greek theories involving 4 bodily humors. According to prominent medical texts, successful conception requires both male and female seed. Yes, women were believed to produce seed similar to men, ideally released simultaneously during a sexual encounter. This creates an interesting contradiction. Recognizing female pleasure as biologically necessary for conception, while simultaneously discouraging too much female enjoyment as potentially sinful or indicating an immodest nature. Position matters tremendously, not just for pleasure but for successful conception. The missionary position isn't just a default. It's considered medically optimal, allowing male seed to be properly directed and retained. Other positions might be acceptable for pleasure, but are considered less effective for procreation and potentially more sinful. Timing matters as well. According to medical authorities, conception is most likely during and immediately after menstruation, precisely the opposite of modern understanding. This misinformation leads many couples trying to conceive to focus their efforts at the least fertile time of the month, while those hoping to avoid conception inadvertently choose the most fertile time for relations. Weather and astrological conditions are also considered critical factors in conception. Humid, warm conditions are thought to increase fertility. The position of planets, particularly Jupiter and Venus, might determine the sex and character of any child conceived. Conception during a full moon might produce madness in offspring. Conception during certain saints' days might bestow special gifts or protections. And then there's the matter of preventing conception, a complicated moral and practical issue. The Church officially prohibits contraception, considering it interference with God's will. Nevertheless, various methods exist and are quietly practiced, particularly among those who already have more children than they can feed. Herbal preparations dominate contraceptive methods. Drinks containing Queen Anne's lace seeds, pennyroyal, or wild carrot are believed to prevent conception when consumed regularly. Other approaches include pessaries made with acacia gum, prolonged breastfeeding, correctly understood to reduce fertility, and various barrier methods of varying effectiveness and comfort. The withdrawal method, coitus interruptus, is perhaps the most common approach, mentioned in the Bible itself in the story of Onan. While religious authorities condemn the practice, It remains widespread across all social classes. Of course, all these methods have significant failure rates, leading to the common phenomenon of early first children and suspicious gaps between subsequent births in family records. For those seeking to enhance rather than prevent fertility, an equally diverse pharmacopoeia exists. Women hoping to conceive might consume teas made from red clover, drink wine infused with pulverized rabbit's womb, or place certain stones on their abdomen during intercourse. Men concerned about potency might consume oysters, root vegetables of suggestive shape, or various concoctions containing animal testicles, operating on the early medical principle that like cures like. Despite the rigid social structures surrounding marriage, historical evidence suggests that many 17th century couples developed genuine affection and physical intimacy. Private diaries and letters reveal relationships of tenderness, passion, and mutual satisfaction, though typically expressed in language more restrained than modern sensibilities might prefer. Behind closed doors, away from public scrutiny and religious judgment, human connection flourishes in ways that official morality might not sanction but that human nature inevitably discovers. Jealousy and rivals. When love becomes war. As night falls and lanterns illuminate the taverns and gathering places, another aspect of 17th century romance emerges from the shadows. The volatile, often violent world of romantic rivalry and jealousy. In an era when marriages determine not just emotional satisfaction, but economic survival, social standing, and familial alliance, romantic competition takes on life or death significance, sometimes literally. For men, perceived romantic insults often result in direct confrontation. The elaborate honor culture of the 17th century means that even a suspected glance at one's betrothed might merit a challenge. Among the aristocracy, such challenges frequently lead to duels, formalized combat governed by strict codes of conduct, but often resulting in serious injury or death. The duel represents a curious paradox in 17th century society. Officially illegal in most European countries, but socially expected among certain classes. In England, dueling is explicitly forbidden by both law and royal proclamation. Yet refusing a challenge results in social ostracism more damaging than legal penalties. For a gentleman, being labeled a coward is worse than being labeled a criminal. Better to die with honor pierced through the liver than live with honor besmirched. The mechanics of dueling follow precise protocols. The challenged party chooses weapons, typically swords in the early 17th century, increasingly replaced by pistols by century's end. Seconds are appointed to negotiate potential reconciliation and ensure fair conduct. A surgeon might be present to attend wounds, though often arriving too late to be of much use. For the middling and lower classes, romantic rivalries might be settled through less formalized but equally violent means. Tavern brawls, ambushes on dark roads, or community-sanctioned fistfights. Village records and court documents reveal countless cases of men assaulting rivals in love, often with agricultural implements pressed into service as weapons. Women's expressions of jealousy take different forms, constrained by social limitations, on female violence but no less intense or consequential. Unable to issue formal challenges, women might wage campaigns of social destruction, spreading rumors, questioning virtue, or highlighting physical flaws of rivals. The damage from such campaigns can be devastating in small communities where reputation constitutes a woman's primary asset. A well-placed rumor about improper behavior can destroy marriage prospects more effectively than any sword thrust. For the truly desperate or those versed in folk traditions, romantic rivalry might enter the realm of the supernatural. Local cunning folk offer services ranging from love potions to ensure affection to curse tablets to afflict rivals with impotence, infertility, or disease. Love potions typically contain herbs associated with desire, damiana, vanilla, orris root, along with more dubious ingredients like dried bat's blood or powdered deer antler. The truly desperate might include personal elements, menstrual blood in food, hair in a pouch worn near the heart, or nail clippings buried under a doorstep. Whether such concoctions work through genuine pharmacological properties, psychosomatic effects, or simply the confidence they give the user is a question for scholars. What matters is that people believe in their efficacy enough to risk accusations of witchcraft to employ them. Jealousy within established relationships carries its own dangers. Husbands suspicious of their wives' fidelity have legal recourse to violence that wives rarely share. While moderate correction using physical punishment is legally permitted for husbands, social custom generally frowns on extreme brutality, though community intervention typically occurs only in the most egregious cases. Adulterous women face severe consequences: social ostracism, abandonment, loss of children and property, confinement in convents or asylums, and in some regions, public humiliation rituals involving being paraded through town in states of undress or wearing symbolic horns. Men caught in adultery face more variable consequences. Aristocratic men might engage in relatively open extramarital affairs with little social penalty, while a craftsman caught with another man's wife might lose his livelihood when guild members refuse to associate with him. The intensity of jealousy and rivalry in 17th century romance reflects the high stakes involved. When marriage determines your economic future, social position, and even whether your children survive infancy, romantic competition becomes a matter of existential, rather than merely emotional significance. Part 6. Night. The darker side of love, forbidden romance. Love against all rules. Night has fallen completely now, cloaking the world in darkness pierced only by scattered lanterns and moonlight. As respectable folk retire to their homes, we turn to those forms of romantic attachment that dare not show their faces in daylight. Forbidden love in its many manifestations. Despite rigid social structures and religious prohibitions, human hearts remain stubbornly resistant to proper regulation. Throughout the 17th century, people fall in love with those they shouldn't. Across class boundaries, religious divides, racial differences, and even genders. Interfaith romance presents, perhaps, the most common form of forbidden love in an age of intense religious division. In England, relationships between Protestants and Catholics carry risks ranging from family disapproval to actual legal penalties. The marriage of a Protestant to a Catholic might result in disinheritance, loss of position, or accusations of treasonous sympathy. Meet me by the old oak at midnight. Tell no one. Wear no cross. Notes like these, passed secretly between lovers of different faiths, represent desperate attempts to carve out moments of connection in a world determined to keep them apart. Such relationships typically end in one of three ways: conversion of one partner, often leading to estrangement from their family; elopement to more tolerant regions; or painful separation when social pressure becomes unbearable. Cross-class romance faces different but equally formidable obstacles. A nobleman who truly loves a commoner might be able to take her as a mistress but rarely as a wife. Marriage across significant class boundaries requires sacrifices few are willing to make. Noble women have even fewer options. A lady who falls for her groom or a common soldier faces starker choices: complete abandonment of her position and identity, or abandonment of her heart's desire. Historical records show that most choose the latter, though occasional scandalous elopements provide fodder for ballads and cautionary tales. Some cross-class relationships find legitimacy through the transformative power of money. A wealthy merchant's daughter might marry into impoverished nobility, trading her father's fortune for her husband's title. A successful tradesman might purchase land, adopt gentlemanly habits, and eventually be accepted as gentry, though the process typically takes generations rather than individual lifetimes. Interracial relationships exist throughout the 17th century, particularly in port cities and colonial territories where diverse populations interact. In England proper, small communities of people of color, primarily from Africa and the Caribbean, form part of the urban landscape, particularly in London. These relationships face varying levels of opposition depending on location, social class, and individual circumstances. Legal prohibitions against interracial marriage emerge primarily in colonial contexts rather than in Europe itself, where such relationships, while socially remarkable, often exist in legal gray areas. Perhaps the most hidden, forbidden relationships are those between people of the same gender. The 17th century lacks modern vocabulary for sexual orientation, instead discussing acts rather than identities. Sodomy between men is a capital crime in England and most of Europe, though prosecutions typically require multiple witnesses and consequently remain relatively rare. Emotional bonds between men or between women, even intense ones, may escape scrutiny if they maintain public conformity to gender norms and expectations. Close same-sex friendships are celebrated in literature and letters, creating space for relationships that might, in private, transcend conventional boundaries. My dearest heart, my soul's companion, how these hours apart feel like years. Such phrases appear in letters between both opposite-sex lovers and same-sex friends. Deliberately ambiguous language allowing multiple interpretations depending on the reader. Female partnerships face less legal persecution than male ones, but greater economic challenges in a world where women's financial independence remains severely limited. Some women navigate these constraints through Boston marriages or similar arrangements. Two women living together as companions, pooling resources, and creating households that function effectively as marriages in all but name. What unites all forms of forbidden love is the necessity for secrecy, the constant awareness of risk, and the painful calculations partners must make between personal happiness and social survival. Modern romantic obstacles pale in comparison to a world where choosing the wrong partner might mean not just disapproving in-laws, but execution, imprisonment, or complete social death. Yet historical records, diaries, letters, court documents, and literary works reveal that people have always found ways to love against the rules, calculating that some connections are worth any risk. Divorce and separation, breaking unbreakable bonds. As midnight approaches, we turn to the darkest aspect of 17th century romance. What happens when love dies, but marriage remains? In an era when marriage is considered a sacred, lifelong covenant, the paths to ending an unsuccessful union are narrow, treacherous, and deeply stigmatizing. True divorce, as we understand it today, the complete dissolution of a marriage with the right to remarry, is vanishingly rare in 17th century England. Following the Protestant Reformation, England establishes ecclesiastical courts that can grant two types of separation: divorce, a mensa et thoro, from bed and board, which allows spouses to live separately but not remarry, and annulment, which declares the marriage never valid in the first place. Grounds for bed and board separation include extreme cruelty, adultery, primarily when committed by the wife, and desertion. Even with evidence of these conditions, separations remain difficult to obtain, expensive to pursue, and socially devastating, particularly for women. Annulments require proving that some impediment existed at the time of marriage. Pre-contracts, to others, consanguinity, being too closely related, impotence, or non-consummation. The process typically involves humiliatingly detailed testimony about the most intimate aspects of marital life. In especially notorious cases of impotence claims, courts might order physical examinations of the husband by medical professionals, or even Congress tests, supervised attempts at intercourse to verify claims of inability. One can only imagine the performance pressure involved in such scenarios. For the wealthy and well-connected, private separation agreements offer an alternative to court proceedings. These legal contracts specify living arrangements, financial, support, and child custody without formally ending the marriage. The spouses live separately but remain legally bound, unable to remarry while both live. For those of more modest means, informal separation is the most common solution to failed marriages. One spouse, typically the husband, simply leaves, establishing a new life elsewhere, perhaps even a new relationship and family, despite the technical illegality of bigamy. Women abandoned by husbands face particularly harsh circumstances. Still, legally married, they cannot remarry but must somehow support themselves in an economy structured around male provision. Many abandoned wives turn to family support, charity, parish relief, or entering service in other households. The most desperate might petition for a private act of parliament, legislation specifically dissolving their particular marriage. This option, available only to the wealthy and influential, requires presenting evidence of extreme circumstances to lawmakers and becoming the subject of public discussion and frequently ridicule. Throughout the century, only a handful of such acts pass, nearly all initiated by men seeking to divorce adulterous wives. The double standard is explicit. A wife's adultery threatens patrilineal inheritance and is therefore grounds for divorce, while a husband's adultery merely reflects regrettable but natural male weakness. For those without access to legal separation or divorce, more permanent solutions occasionally appear in court records. Suspicious deaths, convenient accidents, and even murder sometimes end marriages that have no other exit. Penalties for such actions are severe, typically execution, but desperation sometimes outweighs even fear of the gallows. More commonly, spouses in unbearable marriages simply endure, finding what small comforts they can in separate interests, separate bedchambers, or separate lives maintained under one roof for the sake of children, property, or reputation. The difficulty of ending marriages in the 17th century reflects fundamental social beliefs that marriage exists primarily for social stability and economic function rather than personal happiness, that individual fulfillment matters less than collective welfare, and that the discomfort of two people matters less than maintaining the institution itself. It would take centuries before the concept of marriage as a potentially temporary arrangement, based on mutual satisfaction, would gain legal and social acceptance. For now, those who choose poorly in love are mostly sentenced to live with their mistakes, or find creative, often desperate ways around them. Part 7. Midnight. Legacies of Love Growing Old. Together, the lucky ones. The clock strikes midnight, marking another day's passage in this century of plague, war, and startling scientific discovery. For those fortunate enough to find compatible partners and survive the myriad dangers of 17th century life, growing old together represents a triumph against formidable odds. Old age arrives early by modern standards. By 40, most people show significant physical deterioration from hard labor, multiple pregnancies, poor nutrition, and untreated injuries or illnesses. By 50, you're considered elderly. Reaching 60 merits comment. Surviving to 70 inspires awe. Yet historical records reveal countless couples who navigate decades together, developing partnerships that transcend the purely practical foundations of their unions. Diaries and letters show spouses who become genuine companions, their initial arranged matches evolving into relationships of profound interdependence and often genuine affection. For women who survive childbed and men who avoid war and workplace hazards, long marriages offer certain advantages. As partners age, the rigid gender roles of youth may soften. An elderly husband might share domestic tasks once considered beneath his dignity. A wife past childbearing years might participate more actively in business decisions or property management. These, Long-married couples develop communication systems beyond words. A raised eyebrow that conveys complete understanding, a hand gesture that speaks volumes, patterns of movement around shared spaces that reflect decades of accommodation to each other's habits. They share memories no one else holds. Children born and sometimes lost, homes built and abandoned, harvests, bountiful and failed, plagues survived, wars endured. This shared history creates bonds that transcend whatever initial calculations of advantage brought them together. The physical relationship evolves as well. While medical literature of the period often discourages sexual activity among the elderly as depleting vital energies needed for survival, private writings suggest continuing intimacy adapted to changing bodies and capabilities. Touch remains important. Hands clasped while walking, bodies sharing warmth in narrow beds during cold nights, the comfort of familiar skin against skin. These physical connections carry different meaning in old age, communicating security and continuity in a world of constant uncertainty. For the luckiest couples, complementary skills and temperaments create effective partnerships for navigating the challenges of aging in a world without safety nets beyond family. A husband's declining strength might be balanced by his wife's practical management, her failing eyesight compensated by his continued ability to read to her in the evenings. They nurse each other through illnesses, remember for each other when memory fails, speak for each other when speech becomes difficult. They become, in essence, a single organism with two bodies, neither fully functional alone, but together creating a working whole. And when death inevitably separates them, as it must, the survivor faces a different kind of half-life, functioning without the part of themselves that has been integrated over decades. Widows and widowers in the 17th century rarely speak of broken hearts in the romantic sense, but their writings reveal something perhaps more profound. Broken systems, broken routines, broken completeness. Some find new partners, remarrying, for practical support or companionship. Others remain alone, sustained by children, extended family or community. Many follow their spouses quickly to the grave, their own health collapsing without their accustomed counterbalance. In these long marriages, we find perhaps the most authentic romance of the 17th century. Not the passionate declarations of youthful courtship or the calculated alliances of marriage markets, but the steady construction of shared lives that, brick by brick and year by year, build structures strong enough to shelter two people through the storms of a difficult century. Legacy. Love beyond death. As our day in the 17th century comes to its close, we contemplate the final aspect of historical romance, the legacies, both literal and figurative, that love leaves behind. For most couples, children represent the most tangible legacy of their union. In an era of high infant mortality, successful reproduction isn't just a personal milestone, but a demographic triumph. Approximately 30% of children die before reaching adulthood. Families typically birth twice as many children as they expect to raise to maturity. The emotional investment in these precarious young lives varies widely across the social spectrum. Among aristocracy, children often spend minimal time with parents, raised instead by wet nurses, nursemaids, tutors, and eventually sent to other households for education or apprenticeship. Among middling and lower classes, children become integrated into family economic activities from early ages, helping on farms, learning trades, or entering service. The boundaries between childhood and adulthood blur, with many children taking on adult responsibilities by age 10 or 12. Despite these pragmatic arrangements, personal writings throughout the century reveal deep parental attachment and devastating grief when children die. Many mothers' diaries record meticulous details of their children's development, illnesses, and personalities. Fathers' account books sometimes include unexpectedly personal notes about children's milestones interspersed among business transactions. The death of a child, expected as a statistical probability but devastating as a personal experience, tests marital bonds in unique ways. Some couples find shared grief draws them closer. Others discover unbridgeable distances in their different grieving styles. Marriages shatter under this pressure. Others reform into stronger, if permanently altered, shapes. Beyond children, couples leave legacies in property, businesses, and material goods. Wills and testaments reveal careful provisions for surviving spouses, attempts to secure their comfort and protection after death. Often, these documents contain the most explicit expressions of affection found in formal records. As social constraints relax in the face of mortality, to my beloved wife, Anne, who has been my greatest joy and comfort these 30 years, I leave all my worldly goods and the assurance that I wait for her in God's kingdom. Such sentiments, appearing in otherwise dry legal documents, offer glimpses into relationships that public behavior and social convention might never reveal. For those without children, by choice, circumstance, or tragedy, legacies take different forms. Some establish charitable foundations, endow almshouses, or leave bequests to religious institutions. Others invest in nieces and nephews, apprentices, or godchildren, extending their influence beyond direct lineage. Some couples leave literary legacies, collections of letters, jointly authored works, or commemorative writings. The poetry of grieving spouses provides some of the century's most moving literature, raw emotion breaking through conventional forms. Like as the waves make, towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. Shakespeare's sonnets on time and immortality, though written slightly earlier, capture the 17th century preoccupation with legacy, memory, and what remains when the body fails. Perhaps the most profound legacy of 17th century relationships lies in their contribution to evolving understandings of marriage itself. Throughout this century, subtle shifts occur in how people conceptualize romantic relationships. The Protestant emphasis on companionate marriage, the increasing literacy that allows more people to express personal feelings in writing, and philosophical reconsiderations of individual rights all contribute to gradually changing expectations. By century's end, marriage remains primarily an economic and social institution, but the seeds of its eventual transformation into a relationship, based on personal choice and affection, have been planted. The idea that one might reasonably expect emotional fulfillment from marriage, not just practical support and legitimate children, begins its slow germination. And so our day in the 17th century draws to a close. You have navigated the treacherous waters of historical romance, survived the hygiene, endured the chaperones, negotiated the contracts, and perhaps, against all odds, found something resembling love. As you climb into your bug-infested bed, your unwashed spouse beside you, perhaps you'll reflect on how fortunate you are to live in an era of dating apps, deodorant, and no-fault divorce. Or perhaps you'll recognize the common humanity that bridges the centuries, the universal desire for connection, understanding, and someone with whom to face life's uncertainties. Either way, sleep well, dear viewer. And remember, however bad your last date was, at least it didn't involve discussing your dowry with your uncle, or comparing the merits of potential spouses based on how many of their previous partners survived childbirth. In the morning, you'll wake in your own century surrounded by the luxuries of modern romance, the freedom to choose, the option to leave, the radical notion that love itself might be sufficient reason to commit your life to another person. But perhaps you'll carry with you some appreciation for those who came before, who loved, lost, and persevered under conditions that make modern dating complaints seem trivial by comparison. Their blood flows in your veins. Their choices led to your existence. Their understanding of love shaped the institutions we continue to evolve. If you enjoyed this journey through the romantic wasteland of the 17th century, please like, subscribe, And comment below how many goats your hand in marriage would be worth. If you have questions about historical courtship practices I didn't cover, leave them in the comments and I'll address them in my next video. How people broke up in the 1600s. When "it's not you, it's me" could get you hanged. Until next time, this is Historical Bedtime Stories, reminding you that romance has always been complicated, love has always found a way, and personal hygiene has, thankfully, improved dramatically.